Namaste everybody, welcome to Act 3 Scene 2 of Romeo and Juliet, and in this session we're going to be analysing how Juliet's character changes and develops over the scene, with some key techniques today, looking at dramatic irony, oxymorons, a bit of structure, there's a mention of adverbs, and there is some imagery. So brace yourselves and let's go in for the analytical kill. Right, let's try and change slides, so that would help. We know how to do that. Helps if the computer works. There we go. Oh, I jumped forward. Right, okay. Now we've got it working. Beautiful. So before you go any further, you might need to pause the video to do this. I want you to listen to this scene in its entirety, okay? So there's a YouTube link there. If you go to that, you'll be able to play the scene and you can listen to it. So you may want to stop the video and click on to the next slide and do that one. But this audio track is of a modern day translation, so it's not done in the Shakespearean, it's done with it adapted, I suppose, to modern day language, so you should be able to understand what's going on. What I suggest doing is, as you listen to that, you follow in the text so you can sort of see where and what's being said, and sort of track the Shakespearean language at the same time. But hopefully that'll give you a good overview of this scene, okay? So that'll take you 8 minutes because it's an 8-minute video. So if you stop that and go and listen to that now, and then come and rejoin us once you've done that, okay? So, considering you've now listened to that, this should be nice and easy now, okay? So, what we need to remember for this scene then, okay, because it starts with Juliet in her bedroom on her own having another soliloquy, which matches the soliloquy we looked at before, okay, so the second soliloquy. But what we need to remember for this scene is that Juliet thinks these things. She has no knowledge that Mercutio and her cousin Tybalt are dead. She has no, she hasn't seen Romeo since the wedding day, so that was the last time she saw him, and she's waiting for Romeo to arrive once night falls so he can sneak in and see her, and it's also her wedding night. Therefore, on a wedding night, tradition for the couple to sleep together for the first time. So Juliet is actually looking forward to sleeping with Romeo, okay? So this is all a form of dramatic irony in this scene, okay? Because we know things that Juliet does know. We know Mercutio's dead. We know Romeo has killed Tybalt, and we know that Romeo has been banished, okay? So, coughing away. So really important that we know these things, but it's also important that Juliet doesn't, because it affects her reaction to things, okay? So, in her soliloquy then, that's the big long speech at the start of this scene, we learn some things about her. We learn that she's quite desperate, we learn she's impatient, we learn that she's thinking about sex and is desperate for sex with Romeo. She's also quite loving and quite tender towards Romeo, but she's also really longing for him and really wants to see him, all right? So these are some of the things we learn about her in this first section, and let's just dive in and see how we can do that. You may want to challenge yourself and pause the video again at this moment and see if you can spot within that monologue, that's soliloquy, sorry, you spot any of these things in her. Okay, so if you can find a quote that matches each of these. So have a little go at doing that and pause the video and then come back to it in just a second. Okay, so once you've had a look yourself, hopefully these will cover some. You may have got some of the same ones. So the first quote we're going to look at is when she says, "Bring in cloudy night immediately, spread thy close curtain, love performing night, that the runaway eyes may wink, and Romeo leap to these arms untalked and unseen." Sorry, untalked of and unseen. Okay, so what she's saying is hopefully the night will come quickly, so the night can hide Romeo so he can come and see me and jump into my arms and nobody will know he's there. That's sort of the meaning behind this, and that's a lot of what she's saying throughout this speech. If we dive in a little bit closely, if we look at the purple quotes first of all, okay, I've highlighted them in purple, talk about cloudy night, close curtain, untalked of and unseen. She's referring to the nighttime acting as like a blanket of hiding, okay, so it helps to hide Romeo. So it acts for cover of the two lovers, okay, so darkness hides them, and it means that when it's night, Romeo can sneak in and see her, and they can meet up, and that's how they're going to meet, okay? So Juliet is desperate for the night to come, because when night arrives, that means Romeo arrives, hence her sort of impatience with the daytime and wanting it to get to night. We've also got then, if you look at the blue quote, we've got the adverb immediately, which is emphasising Juliet's desperation and impatience. This really links back, if you remember, when she was waiting for news from the nurse in Act 2, Scene 5, and she was really, really impatient then, wasn't she? Desperate to know and asking all those questions. You can always go and remind yourself of that scene, but it links really, really closely to that. Then obviously you've got things like love performing night in the pink. Okay, well, that's a reference to sex. Okay, so this idea that at night love can be performed. And you could also argue that the runaways may wink is sort of giving the idea, again, a little wink towards that perhaps. It's quite an interesting quote that there's no definite definition of that one. It even says in our book that we use in school that no one knows what this means. There's over 40 different suggested meanings. I personally think it's a little bit of a saucy quote. I think it's leaning towards the idea of sex there. Okay, so further evidence then that shows us how desperate and impatient Juliet is. She says, "So tedious is this day, as is the night before some festival to an impatient child that have new robes and may not wear them." Okay, so Juliet is saying how desperate and impatient. She even uses the word impatient at this point. Okay, so tedious means long and boring. Okay, so she's saying the day is really long. Again, it's because she wants night to come, and then she's comparing it. Okay, so as or like is obviously a simile. So she's comparing it to a child that's been given new clothes and is going to a festival the next day, but isn't allowed to wear them. Okay, and it's desperation to put them on and wanting to wear them and wanting to go to the festival, but having to wait. That impatient feeling when something exciting the next day is happening, and you have to wait a little bit longer for it. So this all acts as evidence, just showing us how impatient Juliet really is. Now this bit dives in a little bit more deeply, okay, so this is for like probably the level 6 pluses. I suggest everybody still listens to it because you may pick up some really good bits and you may actually be able to bump your grade up by listening to the page, okay, but this is definitely targeted at higher level responses. And what we've got throughout this first soliloquy is the use of light and dark imagery, which is playing important roles in creating the mood and foreshadowing what's going to happen and giving fate a vehicle by which to visit itself upon the characters in the play. So you'll notice that there are lots of links to daytime and nighttime. It's like that, if you ever used to watch that TV program with the bird where it used to go, daytime, nighttime, daytime. I don't know if you know what I'm on about. If you know, you probably just think I'm being a right weirdo there. But never mind. So what we've got then is Juliet is beckoning the darkness because it's become a sanctuary for this couple. If love be blind, it best agrees with night, because she and Romeo met under the cover of moonlight when they first met. They agreed to marry as they were shrouded in darkness and were forced apart as dawn broke. They consummate their marriage at night, and they ultimately die together under the cover of night. Their affinity for darkness illustrates their separation from temporal feuding world. Okay, so it's this idea that the nighttime for these two is a gift because it means they can meet, they're hidden, they're not seen, whereas the daytime's dangerous for them. Remember, if Romeo gets caught in Juliet's house, he will be killed if he gets caught on the ground. Okay, so there's that danger added to it. So she's sort of using night imagery as if it's a good thing, whereas in normal, perhaps, love poetry or normal romantic gestures, we talk about the daytime being the most beautiful because it's bright and it brings out all the flowers and all the nature. Okay, so we've got that really clear imagery being used in the comparison between the two. And if we look at the second paragraph here, it says, although external light, the garish sun, has become their enemy, the lovers have often provided light for each other. So it's quite interesting. She refers to the sun as garish there, which is showing she doesn't like the sun. The sun is too bright, too unpleasant. It's the night that's important, which again is adding to that dark imagery of the night being the good thing. But they often refer to each other as the light for each other. So in Act 2, Scene 2, Juliet's eyes are like the stars, according to Romeo. And in Act 1, Scene 5, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. And he even refers to her, Juliet is the sun. Okay? So in the balcony scene. So with all these imagery where they're being compared to light for each other. Here, Romeo brings day in night. Okay, so he brings the daytime to the night for Juliet. He lightens up her night. Juliet begs fate to cut Romeo out in little stars so that all the world be in love with night. So these stars represent both the timeless quality of the couple's love and their fate as star-crossed lovers who will only truly be united in death. So we've got this idea linked to that prologue again, star-crossed lovers, but she wants Romeo, when he dies, she wants Romeo to be the stars above, so everybody can look on him and fall in love with the night in the same way she has fallen in love with Romeo and with the night. Okay, so we then move on with the scene because the nurse then arrives, okay? But what's really important, this is where the dramatic irony is really set up, okay? So, what we know, the nurse is aware that Romeo has killed Tybalt. She knows this, and she's very upset and angry about the fact that Tybalt's dead. And she also knows that Romeo has been banished. Whereas Juliet technically knows nothing. She's totally unaware of what's going on, okay? And she's just waiting for news from the nurse about Romeo's arrival, okay? Wanting sex, wanting to see her husband, okay? And that's all that she's aware of. So when Juliet says, when the nurse arrives, what hast thou there? The cords that Romeo bid thee fetch thee. So the cords are referring to a rope ladder that they drop down from the balcony so Romeo can get up, okay? So she's talking about Romeo. Have you got the ladder that Romeo asked you to get? And the nurse says, alack the day, he's gone, he's killed, he's dead. So if we were Juliet at that moment and we were talking about Romeo, it's quite obvious we're going to assume that the nurse is talking about Romeo. Okay, she is in fact talking about Tybalt, that he's dead, but we can understand here why Juliet might think, because the nurse hasn't been very helpful there, that Romeo is in fact the one that's been killed, is gone, is dead. And what we get here is massive misunderstanding. So Juliet, throughout this scene, to start with, believes that Romeo is dead and the nurse isn't giving her a clear answer. Okay, so second time the nurse has done this to Juliet within the play. She's not revealing information, which is getting Juliet confused and frustrated. Okay, so this first line, these are two sections from this sequence that show this, okay? So when Juliet believes that Romeo's dead, she said, can heaven be so envious? And it's again this idea, isn't it, that heaven has stolen Romeo from the earth. It's envious of Romeo, so it's taken him for himself. Nurse says, Romeo can, through heaven cannot. Sorry, though heaven cannot. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, whoever would have thought it, Romeo. Now, the nurse is actually saying, whoever thought Romeo would kill Tybalt, it's awful, okay? But again, she's not being very clear, and Juliet is still very confused by the whole situation. And Juliet's saying, what devil art thou that dost torment me thus? This torture should be roared in dismal hell. Hath Romeo slain himself? So she's asking, what you want about this is awful. What devil's work here? Talking about hell and devil because it's really bad news. And asking, has Romeo killed himself? Is that why he's dead? Please tell me more. Look at the use of questions. Very, very similar to the scene between Nurse and Juliet before. And this goes on for a little bit where the nurse is just really unclear. In fact, there's a whole page where she doesn't actually reveal what's going on to Juliet. And it's in this instance because the nurse is very wound up and upset about it. Then she finally reveals this and says, oh, Tybalt, the best friend I had, oh, courteous Tybalt, honest gentleman, that ever I should live to see thee dead. So she finally reveals, Juliet, that Tybalt has died, okay? Look again at those O's. Oh, Tybalt, oh, courteous Tybalt. We've talked about exclamations before. Juliet then says, what storm is this that blows so contrary? Is Romeo slaughtered and is Tybalt dead? My dearest cousin and my dearer lord? Then dreadful trumpets sound the general doom, for who is living if these two are gone? So Juliet now thinks that Romeo and Tybalt are dead because, again, the nurse hasn't been very clear. Notice how she talked about her dearest cousin. Okay, look at the suffix on the end. Okay, so we've got dear, and she says dearest cousin, as if the cousin best, but then she says dear lord. So it's telling us that in her eyes, Romeo is better than Tybalt through the use of the est and then the dear. So whatever Tybalt is, Romeo is more to her. Okay, if you can see what I mean there. So if you're not sure about prefixes and suffixes, that could be something you could look as a little bit of revision. All right. So she thinks it's all doom and gloom and saying, what's the point basically of living if these two are both gone? Finally, then the nurse gives us a bit of clarity. Tybalt was gone and Romeo banished. Romeo that killed him, he is banished. Okay, so she's finally revealed that Romeo killed Tybalt, and now Romeo has been banished. And Juliet says, "Oh God, did Romeo's hand shed Tybalt's blood?" It did. Alas, the day it did. And we're finally at a point of clarity now. So Juliet is now up to date of what's going on. Okay, she's had the news bulletin. She is now aware and is on the same page. And this is where we see a massive change in Juliet. Okay, and she says the following speech there, which you can see. Now, what I would like to do is, at this point, Juliet uses lots of oxymorons. So if you remember, oxymorons are two opposites that go together to form a sentence. So, for instance, in Much Ado About Nothing, they talk about a merry war. Okay, now war isn't merry, war's not happy. So the two don't go together. Merry war, so become an oxymoron. Like if somebody was happily sad, well, happy and sad don't go together, so that's an oxymoron. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video, I'd like you to look at that speech there, and I want you to see how many oxymorons can you spot that Juliet is using. Okay, so pause the video, how many oxymorons, where are they, pick them out of the text. You can write them down if you want to, it might be useful. Okay, so I'm going to assume you've paused that and done that and had a little look. Important that you do that because it's good to start spotting them. And there's absolutely loads within this speech, okay? I've picked out a few, I've only done the top bit, but you can have a little look here. Okay, so she says, "Oh, serpent heart hid with a flowering face." So serpent heart and flowering face are the two different ones. So the idea of the serpent being a villain imagery, but flowering face being that nice imagery. So the idea of it being a flower, but hidden in that is a serpent. In the same way, she says, "Did ever dragon keep so fair a cave?" So we've got the bad imagery of the dragon, but then we've got the nice imagery of a fair cave, okay, that the dragon doesn't belong in there. Then they get really good here. She calls him a beautiful tyrant. So it's like a pretty villain, basically, is what she's saying. Fiend angelical, so enemy angel. Dove feathered raven. So ravens are dark coloured, aren't they? They're black, whereas doves are white. Wolfish ravening lamb. Okay, so a wolf is a predator and lamb is like a nice little innocent creature. So you've got the two differences there. Despised substance of divinest show. Okay, again opposite there. Okay, despised and divinest. We've got more down here. Damned saint. Okay, so damned means hell basically. Saint means heaven. Honourable villain. So if you're good and bad. So she's putting all of these together, and there's loads sort of around it, okay, and this imagery of how she's been deceived by how beautiful Romeo is, yet he's a villain at heart. Okay, so a total change of Juliet here because she's suddenly turning against Romeo for the first time in play. This man she loves, that she just married, we are now seeing this conflict of her ideas. And what it tells us is that Juliet is expressing her conflicting emotions for Romeo using oxymoronic language. She hates Romeo for killing her cousin Tybalt, but at the same time, Romeo is still her husband, and she can't believe that someone so beautiful could be so evil. So she's torn between her emotions of love and anger. Okay, so that's why we're using them. Why Juliet's using them there, okay? So after this speech, the nurse joins in. It's like there's no trust, no faith, no honesty in men. All perjured, all forsworn, all naught, all dissemblers. Shame come to Romeo. So the nurse is agreeing with Juliet and saying, yeah, he's a villain, he's awful, men can't be trusted. How could he do this? Shame upon Romeo. Okay, so the nurse is supporting Juliet in what she's saying. But here's where the cracks start showing the nurse and Juliet's relationship, because Juliet, although she was annoyed with Romeo, suddenly turns on the nurse and says, where's it gone? "Blistered be thy tongue for such a wish." So she says to the nurse, she's basically saying, how dare you speak about my husband in that way? May you get blisters on your tongue for saying such a horrible thing. So it's one of these instances, you probably all experienced it, where somebody says something really horrible and you join in and they go, you can't say that, you haven't got a right to say that, you can't say that about my family, you can't say that. And Juliet's doing exactly the same thing with the nurse on here and is turning on her. And the nurse sort of tries to argue back and says, "Will you speak well of him that killed your cousin? So will you speak nicely of someone that has killed your cousin?" And Juliet says, "Well, should I speak ill of him? That's my husband. So should I talk badly against my husband?" Okay, and we're starting to see this sort of brief argument between the two of them there, that Juliet's unhappy that the nurse would say such horrible things about her husband. And then Juliet changes her opinion again, and now is really upset with herself for speaking ill of her husband, saying bad things about Romeo. She even at one point says, poor my lord, what tongue shall smooth thy name? Saying, oh, I have to say nice things about you because I feel really bad that I've been horrible. But she also says then, and later on learns that Romeo has been banished. Okay, she learns that Romeo is banished, and suddenly the fact that Romeo is banished becomes more important to her than the fact that Tybalt's dead. And she says Tybalt is dead and Romeo is banished. And that banished is one word. Banished. Sorry, that one word banished have slain 10,000 Tybalts. Okay, so for Juliet, Romeo being banished is worse than hearing that Tybalt has died 10,000 times. She'd rather hear that Tybalt's dead 10,000 times than once hearing that Romeo is banished. Okay, so that is sort of there. Now, just point out, I haven't actually done it here, but whenever you look at the text, it's normally got a little line above the E on banished, and it's actually because in Shakespearean time we would have said banished. Okay, it's to do with the rhyme scheme and fit it in, but that's how it would have been said. So it would be say Romeo is banished. That banished, that one word banished, have slain 10,000 Tybalts. Okay, so just if you ever hear banished, it's the same as banished. It was just the pronunciation, how we're supposed to say it in the Shakespearean text, right? So obviously Juliet, mass upset because Tybalt is dead. Not sorry, but even worse that Romeo has been banished. And then she says, after my wedding bed and death, not Romeo, take my maidenhead. So she has a bit of a strop, is one way of putting it. She said, I'm going to my wedding bed. So normally a wedding bed is where you have sex. And she's saying that death will take her virginity, not Romeo, because he can't anymore, because he's gone. She'd rather die and let her body rot into the ground and that be how her virginity is taken, than anybody else do it than Romeo. Okay, so that's what she's saying there. So finally, right at the end of the scene, Nurse sort of comforts Juliet and is back on Juliet's side and is helping her again and says, hide to your chamber, I'll find Romeo to comfort you. I wot well where he is. Hark ye, your Romeo will be here at night. I'll to him, he is hid at Lawrence's cell. So she's saying, I know where Romeo is, I'll go and get him and I'll bring him here tonight so you can see him before he goes and have some comfort. Juliet says, oh, find him, give this ring to my true knight and bid him come to take his last farewell. Okay, so she's talking about him as a knight, her knight in shining armour. Okay, that's how he is. That's why in the film that we've watched, he dresses as a knight and she dresses as an angel, because it's to do with the words that have been said. But they're going there to have their last farewell, their last meeting before he's banished. Okay, so that is sort of the plan. Cool, we've made it through that whole scene. I know it's a slightly longer video, this one, because I wanted to get the scene done in one hit rather than separate videos. So your task for this one, slightly differently than before, I don't necessarily want you to write a full response. This isn't an answer response. This is you gathering your notes together about this scene and making sure they're clear, okay? So what I want everybody to really do is to complete a character tracker for Juliet in this scene, thinking about how her emotions change, and I've put 5 ways in which that happens that I want you to try and find text to support that, and you can do this bullet points. So for instance, the 5 points are, she's desperate to see Romeo and lose her virginity, so where in the text do we see that? Second, confusion and worry, because she doesn't know what the nurse is saying. Okay, she thinks Romeo might be dead, but isn't clear. Okay, so look at that section. Then she has anger and frustration towards Romeo. Think about the use of oxymorons at that point. 4, anger at the nurse for shaming Romeo. How does she turn on the nurse? What's the evidence for that? And why is that a strange thing? 5, she's upset for her treatment of Romeo and the fact she's been rude about him, and she's really upset about the fact he's banished. Okay, or banished, I should say. So you need to try and find evidence to support each of them. It can all be bullet points. Some can be quotes from the actual text. Some can be stuff that you've learned, but you should try and get a few points for each one. Try and do this in depth. Don't do it as quickly as you can. That's not the point of it. It's about pulling out your information. I've put some further things to consider if you do challenge and super challenge. So challenge, as well as doing these 5 evidence trackers, you might want to consider how dramatic irony is used and at what points dramatic irony is used by Shakespeare to create effect. And super challenge, I want you to try and link in the idea of the dark and light imagery. Consider the structure. Why is it structured in this way? Why is Juliet changing emotions? Does that add anything to the way we learn about her character? So obviously, bullet point list for this one. It'd be great to see what you've done, but it doesn't necessarily need to be marked. This one is in the same way as the other questions, but it'd be nice to just have a glance over what you've done, please, to do this one. If you want to write a response, you may. But hopefully that's made sense for that one, and hopefully you've got all the information that you require for this scene. So that is the end of the PowerPoint there. I've now just got to shut it down. Bear with me a second. Where has it gone? Ooh. It does this weird thing. It doesn't like shutting down. As you know, I always do this at the end of every video. Can't actually shut it down. I found it. Thank you for listening, guys, and hope you get on well with the task.